Hello everyone, I'm Halcylion and today I would like to welcome you back to... I meant to say I would like to welcome you to the 4th episode of Corporate Reports. Anyway, we accomplished quite a lot since the Megacorp was founded. We earned a lot of money, recruited 9 subsidiaries, and we made our home in the land that used to be Botania. Well, it's still Botania, but it's under new management now. But this was only the beginning. Now it is time to use all of our land, resources and manpower to take control of this continent once and for all. There's one more ruin that needs to be toppled if we are to rebuild this land in my image. The Empire, or what remains of it. Before we do that, however, we have some small adjustments to make before we go to war. First and foremost, my companions have unassigned skill points and they need me to guide their professional development. Some were given skills to become competent commanders, while most of them were told to focus on becoming good governors. And of course, they were all taught better smithing techniques. Some of them even became capable of crafting 5 weapons in a single day instead of just 3, and that's going to be quite profitable in the long run. After they were all trained in their respective specialties, I wanted to prepare my warband for a siege. I was still running with my cavalry, and they're mostly specialized for field battles as they're useless in a siege, so they had to be taken back to Remtoil, and in their stead I would take the reservist infantry and archers. Before going to that castle, however, I also reorganized my prisoners a little bit. I dumped everyone into the dungeon of the capital and took one of each type of unit into my personal warband, amounting to a total of 50 prisoners. In time, they would see the inevitability of a world ruled by Halcorp and eventually join the cause. When my soldiers fall in battle, willing prisoners would be recruited in their place and help advance my goals. Once the cavalry was taken back to their home, I took as much infantry as I could manage, amounting to a total of 258 men. Most of my footmen and archers were tier 4 and above, but we also had a few inexperienced troops brought along. But we're not yet going to war. These guys were taken to my second castle, Halcylion, where they were temporarily stationed in place of the tier 2 troops I took into my party. I wanted to garrison these rookies into Rovalt in order to maximize that town's profitability. As I've previously said, keeping about 100 tier 2 units garrisoned into a town maximizes its revenue while still maintaining the peace. On our way to Rovalt, however, I ran into Ospir, who rules a city not far from our destination, so of course, I offered him 3.8 million in exchange for that city and a nearby castle. With this move, the northern part of Vlandia also became Halcorp-owned territory. But that was not my only move, because in the army led by Ospir, another landowner was marching. Aldrich, who sold me my very first city, or more, a long time ago. Now I had the budget to buy the rest of his land, consisting of Prevend and Drapan Castle, for another 3 million dinars. It would be good if I could peacefully absorb Vlandia into my corporation, but I need to deal with the Empire right now. My foresight tells me that time is running short for that. But with new territory under my control, I had a change of plans. Instead of maximizing the tax revenue of Rovalt, I decided to do it in Ostican instead. I've never seen it under siege in my 9 years on this continent, which leads me to believe that lords don't really bother with it. So I took the tier 2 units out of the garrison of Rovalt and traveled to my new town. When I arrived, I invested some money in the city's development, took all the garrison troops into my party, and stationed the rookies in the city. As I've said, they're cheap, reliable, and they keep the peace. And in case of an assault, together with the militia, they can hold off the enemy until reinforcements arrive to the town's defense. Let's hope it won't come to that. With this maneuver done, Ostican earns 1600 dinars per day, while its garrison is paid 400, and overall, the town contributes 1200 to my coffers on a daily basis. If I dedicated the time to do this to every single one of my towns, I would not need to rely on smithing, which is what I've done next, because I wanted to give my wife a 2-handed falx to remember me by. I don't want to risk losing her on the battlefield, and as such, she was assigned governor of Ostican. I would visit from time to time, maybe even take her with me, but never in a siege. The situation is chaotic in there, and any of my companions could lose their lives. On my way to Botania, I passed through Rovalt once more, invested money into its development, and then I was gonna visit Halcylion again to pick up the warriors I left there. But my party was already filled to capacity by the soldiers taken from Ostican, so I instead marched towards Marunath to finally accomplish a mission that was started almost 10 years ago. When my journey began, I found a strange artifact that was later revealed to be a piece of the dragon banner of Calradios, whose legend says that whoever wields this banner is chosen by the gods themselves to unite the people of Calradia. What a bunch of superstitious bullshit, but the common folk believe in this legend, and if it helps me secure my place as the leader of the Calradian people, why not make use of it? So I went to Marunath and had a chat with Arzagos, a formerly Imperial commander who came to despise the Empire and its ways, and wanted to see it destroyed at all costs. He assembled a dragon banner for me and proclaimed Halcorp to be the rightful successor of the great Calradian Empire. Before I walked out of town, I decided to implement some political reforms. Peerage, the policy that would give the other clans more power within our organization, had to be disavowed, and in its stead, I enacted the royal privilege policy, which would make the ruler's decisions carry more weight. I do want my vassals to have enough power to more efficiently manage various aspects of the corp in my stead, but right now, when the Empire must be toppled, I cannot allow them to challenge my authority. If they decide to make peace with the Empire before it's destroyed and I don't have the influence to overrule their decision, my mission is irrevocably failed. I'll tell you all about this theoretical possibility on another occasion, but for now, we have to focus on the task at hand. As soon as word got out that I am the bearer of the Dragon Banner, the three factions of the Empire put their differences aside and prepared to deal with the imminent threat I posed. But the Empire is in pieces after nearly a decade of constant strife, and most of their territories are occupied by the other kingdoms, so I'm not going to be fighting them. I will simply finish them off. The first on my hit list was Gyarios, leader of the Western Empire, whom I've already fought a few years ago. They hold no territory anymore and have no vassals, so this faction can be rapidly wiped out. Because I needed to move quickly, I disbanded my army and set off on my own, as Gyarios wasn't too far off. He was last spotted in the vicinity of Lagetas, so I set off to catch him. But along the way I spotted Engalfler, a Vlandian nobleman who was doing his duty to his king by raiding a random village, so I chased him for a bit and we had a meeting. He sold me the city of Charas, joined my corporation, and then he was made Lord of Provend in exchange for a generous donation of 1.8 million dinars. His clan is rather large, so I'm glad to have him by my side. I had a similar plan for Gyarios, who was leading an army of 350 men and marched them towards my territory with evil intent. Because I wasn't sure my 258 soldiers could defeat his 350, I briefly considered calling one of my bannermen and bolster my ranks. But I can't risk Gyarios or any of his associates being captured by my vassal, as I wanted them all for myself. So I decided to defy the odds and fight him without any outside help. The battle took place in the village of Promezos, which was going to be raided were it not for my intervention. For some reason, when the battle started, my companions were all stranded from the rest of our troops, right next to the enemy, so I ordered them to retreat ASAP. Luckily, none of them died and they all managed to make their escape, but that was a really close call. As for the battle itself, we had a tremendous advantage as my troops had high ground, and it was in Gyarios' interest to attack our position, so for the Imperials, this was literally an uphill battle. My archers were split into two different groups, which were then placed one in front of the others, but this time we would not use the Battanian shuffle, because the enemy has plenty of cover to make their approach. As such, the infantry formed a shield wall in front of the rangers. I also had a handful of horsemen which were placed on the left flank and would cause disruption on the enemy archers when the fighting starts. My job in this battle was simply to move close to the archers and give them a target to shoot at and take pressure off the infantry. I'd mostly stay behind my very expensive shield and only attack if I see an opening, but I would take no unnecessary risks in a macho attempt to prove my valor on the battlefield. When the enemy footmen clashed with mine, I ordered my infantry to fight ferociously to the last man. They were severely outnumbered, but I had an advantage Gyarios didn't. My men were willing to die for me. His army was not as motivated. Many soldiers fell on both sides and my infantry was all but defeated. But before the enemy infantry could advance on my archers, their morale was crushed, and the few survivors took to their heels in an attempt to save themselves. Only the archers remained, locked into a firefight that the Imperials could have won. But these imps are a bunch of cowards who fled for their lives once they realized that they're fighting for a Pyrrhic victory at best. Their cowardice and selfishness pissed away the sacrifice of their fallen brethren, and instead of a Pyrrhic victory, all they got was a crushing defeat. Gyarios soon fell, the rest of the Imperials scattered, and the day was won. The final tally told an interesting story. 82 Imperial soldiers ran away, while only 86 of mine remained on the battlefield. If the enemy didn't abandon his post, I could have easily been defeated, but my men believe in their leader and our cause. 65 of them paid with their lives and 119 were injured, but together they defeated 269 enemies. I am proud to call them my battle brothers. At the end of the battle, I could have imprisoned Garios and his children, but I had a better idea. Release all of them and befriend their family. When Garios finally abandons the Imperial dream and becomes a vassal to some other monarch, I could then use our positive relations to recruit his clan into my ranks. House Komnos is currently the largest clan, with 6 generals to lead soldiers in my name. But that comes later. For now, the Western Empire was defeated, as their leader joined the northern faction of the Empire, which was now led by Arcor, brother of Lukon, may he rest in peace. Emperor Lukon died believing the Empire will be restored, so he's lucky he's not alive to witness its demise. Because the North has no land, all I gotta do to bring them to heel is defeat their armies. So I asked the locals for rumors about where these lords might be. Arcor was locked up in the dungeon of Epicrotea, as Chiron was too far away in Onira, which I was going to visit soon, but the closest one was Arion. He was last spotted near Umbrella, so I had to chase him down. As I was traveling towards that town, one of my armies took Diathma from the Southern Empire, and when I finally arrived to my destination, Arion hid inside. As I approached, he tried making a run for it, but Tariq, one of my Saranid vassals, was waiting for him, and as soon as he left the safety of the town, he got ambushed. I rode to the help of Tariq to minimize his casualties. We greatly outnumbered Arion's party, and the fight was so easy it's not even worth thinking about. Everyone was told to charge, and only 7 of our men fell in that battle. After getting word that his nephew was defeated in battle, Arcor decided he's fighting for a lost cause, and he became a vassal of Ragea, hoping she'd be the one to rebuild the empire. As for Garios, he joined the Botanians long before I even reached Arion. Now, there was only one Imperial faction left to erase. Hopefully I can do this before my vassals decide it's time for peace. Unlike the first 2/3 of the Empire, the south actually controlled some territory, the town of Onira as well as 2 castles. I've already conquered Onira once, and I suspect its defenses haven't fully recovered, so that's gonna be my first target. But even so, it's not safe to go there alone, so I summoned some of my bannermen into a proper army. I paid a nice amount of influence to get this done, and all I needed to do was go to the town and make my siege preparations. While the camp was being built and the siege engines constructed, my vassals arrived in the army, one by one. When the army was complete and the trebuchet was built, we waited for daylight and we rushed in. 713 versus 319 is a clear victory, and I didn't need to waste time bombarding the city's walls. We could get this done the old-fashioned way, with siege towers and a ram. I did not bother giving my soldiers specific instructions. My archers were told to spread out to make it harder for enemy rangers to hit them, but other than that, everyone was left to their own devices. I personally took cover behind a barricade and started shooting the archers on the walls. I landed some beautiful headshots, got hit by several arrows in return, and when my ammo ran out, I went to refill my quiver from my fallen soldiers, and although it may sound useless, it actually did come into play a bit later. With a full quiver, I scaled the walls and put my falcons to use, downing a couple of enemies, and despite being critically injured, I kept fighting, even though the situation was handled and I did not need to put my life on the line. While my men charged the few survivors, I made my way up the stairs of an archer tower. From my elevated position, I spotted a bowman in the tower next to mine, so I put my arrows to use and killed the guy from afar. Turns out he was the last survivor and the siege was won. The enemies fought valiantly and managed to defeat 105 soldiers, 44 of which paid the ultimate price. This was an easy fight, but while we were recovering the wounded from the battlefield, I found out Tariq of the Saranids had perished in the siege. Losing a general is a heavy price to pay for a city. I shall name my next son Tariq in honor of his sacrifice. But the true reward of this victory was not the city itself. The true reward was the completion of our mission, because after this city was taken, Ragea realized the futility of the Empire and renounced her title of Empress, as well as the rest of the castles she was holding, whose ownership was transferred to Halcorp. So Tariq's sacrifice didn't just get us a town, but 2 castles as well, and most importantly, the end of the Empire. As for the clans that fought for the last remnant, they all joined the Khuzaits, which, as far as I'm concerned, are the greatest threat to my sovereignty. I will have to deal with them before I can conquer the entire world, but we're done waging war for the time being. It is now time for a period of peaceful expansion for the Megacorp, before we deal with this dangerous foe. Once this was all done, it was time to turn back home and reorganize my territory a little, but in my path I ran into our core, and this gave me an idea. Let's recruit all the former emperors now. That would further cement my claim to this continent, so I had to have an audience with a man who led the Northern Empire in its final hour, and see if he's willing to join my organization. It did not take much convincing, and despite the fact he told me he wants some support before joining my cause, he was actually willing to pay me all he had. That's strange. I didn't take his money. Instead, I invested 129,000 into his clan because poor vassals are more prone to becoming traitors, and I can have that. As soon as this happened, I needed to award Corenia Castle to one of my vassals, and since Arcor just joined, the board of directors voted for him to be given this territory. Then it was time to chase the other great Imperial families and add them to my ranks. The closest was Garios, who was last spotted in Jalmaris, right in my path towards Botania. We met, we talked, he joined, but because he was destitute, I could not make him a landowner just yet. I gifted him 2 javelins and then I departed, looking for Ragea, the final piece of my puzzle. She was a stone's throw away, along with another ex-Imperial, Nikasor. Because of all I've done to her in the past, she doesn't even like me, so I had to give her a gift of 200,000 dinars to make amends for the suffering I caused her. A simp move, but a necessary one if I am to be backed by 3 emperors. I got 126,000 back when I sold Mekalovea Castle to her, and with this maneuver, I have now built my right to rule this entire continent. I am the bearer of the Dragon Banner, whose legend says that I am chosen by the gods to rule this continent, and the common folk believe that tale. I am married to Chalia, daughter of Penton, who was the son of Drosios Neretzes, the last legitimate ruler of the United Calradic Empire. If you want to get technical, he was second to last, succeeded by Arenikos, the late husband of Ragea, who was elected by the Senate to lead the empire but shortly after, assassinated by his rivals. Chason, the current leader of House Neretzes, is also a good friend of mine and he supports my claim to the throne, and now, all those who previously called themselves emperors are bound in vassalage to me. But as you've seen, empires fall. So will kingdoms. The only way forward is to rule this land as an economic powerhouse, as a megacorporation that is supported by all the previous monarchs, with me at the helm. What title should I choose? CEO? Chairman? I'll think it over once the continent is mine. For now, I'm simply the first corporate overlord of Calradia. But enough daydreaming, we still have work to do. After Ragea joined, I also suggested to Nikasor that he should follow her example, and he did. His is a small clan with only 2 generals, but as long as we're getting more manpower, I won't complain. He's too poor to be made a landowner, so I gifted him 3 javelins and then I continued my way back home. Nikasor and Ragea joining me at the same time is a historic event, mostly because she was the last Imperial ruler who backed me up. Because this conversation took place on a bridge, we shall name this event the Bridge Deal of 1094, or the Deal at the Bridge. Anyway, after this was all done, I felt like I accomplished my task too quickly, so I decided to add another task. Finish what I started in the beginning of the chapter and purchase all of Vlandia. I will not give you any details about how this went. It was a very time-consuming venture that involved meeting lords, buying their land, inviting them into my conglomerate, and assembling council meetings with my vassals. And of course, smithing an overwhelming amount of collector weapons, because what else am I supposed to do while waiting for my vassals to arrive? If you've watched the previous chapter, you already know all of my moves, so there's no reason to bore you with the details this time around. I will, however, tell you about the important bits that happened during my peaceful expansion stage. First of all, Onira wasn't assigned to anyone, and Garios had the unanimous vote of the council, or board of directors, however you want to call it. Then, because I did not want to be overextended, I called Garios, Arcor, and a drum into a council meeting and bought all the newly acquired territory from them. That territory consisted of the cities of Diathma and Onira, as well as Chenopsis and Corenia castles, which are too far away from our territory to properly be defended. My lords were fairly compensated with a few chests full of coins, as well as territory that I did not particularly need. Some of that territory was purchased from Caladog, and of course, the fiefs I didn't need were sold to him. This was a maneuver that took weeks to execute, and it was done after I purchased most of Vlandia. While I was doing that, however, I knew that land without vassals is worthless, so I also invited several Vlandian clans into my corporation. Servik, Ospir, and Calatilde accepted, while Aldrich, Belgier, and Vartin refused. The last one asked to be paid nearly 1 million for his castle. At the time, it was the last Vlandian fief I purchased, so I had to cough up the gold. But returning to Caladog, I actually sold him that territory in 2 different meetings. The first one went well, but to get rid of Onira, I had to trek to the opposite side of the continent, all the way to Hussenfolk, to secure an audience. But I'm the one who sold him Hussenfolk, so of course he's obligated to patrol his entire territory, which stretches across the entire south. While chasing the dog like a bloodhound, I met several other interesting characters. Prindor, who was once again invited into my corp and he once again refused, as well as Tazlur, from whom I purchased 2 Kuzeit forts, which were sold to Caladog when I finally caught up to him, along with the city of Onira and several of my javelins, for the total sum of 3.6 million. Then I had to walk all the way back to Vlandia and purchase what remained of it from Vartin, which I've already mentioned, as well as their Thurt. When I got to Sargot, I met the Vlandian king and purchased all of his fiefs for the low price of 5.55 million dinars. After the sale, my finances were at critical levels, less than 200k, lower than I've ever been in the past few years. To fix this issue, I called Aaron into my army, and while waiting for him I spent some time at the forge. When he arrived, I sold him all the weapons we crafted for 3.27 million. In a way, I used him as my personal piggy bank. Appropriate, since his banner depicts a golden boar. Speaking of golden boar, at some point I also met Gerald, the leader of a mercenary company with that exact name, and he was hired into the corporation. His crossbowmen could prove valuable, until he decides to join another kingdom. Such is the business of hiring mercs. They can't be relied on, no matter how much you pay them. Finally, after expanding our operation with the total acquisition of Vlandia, it was time to dole out the territory to each of my vassals and ensure they don't venture from one border to the other as they patrol their territories. There was a lot of tedious micromanagement involved, as some of my vassals simply could not afford the fiefs I wanted to sell them, so I had to give them javelins, wait for them to meet emissaries of the private collector, make more money, and when it was all said and done, after several weeks, our land was distributed in the following manner. Nicassor was sold Fort Cranirog, a formerly Sturgian castle that was purchased from their Thurt. Calatilde, matriarch of De Aromonk, one of the largest clans in the organization, was given back her hometown of Yakulan in exchange for 2.5 million and the castle she held in my name. As for the 3 emperors, they were each given dominion over a major city. Arcor was offered the town of Revel, Garios was given Galend, and Ragea would manage Sargot in my name. Once this was all done, I took a look at the clans in my kingdom to make sure each of them controls at least a little bit of territory. Once it was confirmed that indeed they do, I had to do something that should have been done a long time ago. I called the vassals that had financial troubles and gifted them some crafted javelins, for them to sell to the private collector and make some goddamn money. Tynops, Fefen, and Lucian were the worst offenders in this regard. Bunch of broke-ass niggas. But not everyone was broke, and because I crafted an industrial amount of collector weapons, I sold as many as I could to my other vassals. Engulfer and Chason bought a few and doubled their investment, and I was surprised to see that Desporion had a whole lot of money, 5.52 million. He gave it all to me and got most of my weapons. At the end of my management phase, it was time to take a look at everything I've achieved in the past year. I earned a wealth of over 22 million dinars, built a lot of influence, mostly from all the towns under my domain. I destroyed the empire, hired the former emperors into my megacorp among several other big clans, and I purchased all of Vlandia. I've also done a few acts of charity towards some of my less fortunate vassals, but not out of the kindness of my own heart. It was an investment. They will use that money to build their armies and conquer this world in my name. Now we should get ready for a war with the Kuzeit, but before the hostilities begin, I have some more preparations to make. For now, the West is completely secured, and I can safely say that all of our goals for this chapter have been achieved. I have nothing more to add to that, other than thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.